Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We're excited to share insights from our presentation on Stanley Brandis' article, Iconography in Mexico's Day of the Dead, Origins and Meaning. This article explores the rich symbolism behind Day of the Dead traditions in Mexico, revealing how they blend history, culture, and spirituality. We'll be discussing the main themes, key findings, and the real-world relevance of Brandis' work. Let's get started.
We'll start our presentation by exploring the 5 key findings from Stanley Brandis' article, connecting each one to the main theme and highlighting why they're significant. These insights will help us understand the deeper meaning behind the Day of the Dead traditions. From there, we'll move into an analysis, examining both the strengths and weaknesses of Brandis' arguments. We'll also look at how these findings connect to the broader themes from our course, as well as real-world cultural discussions. Next, we'll share some real-world applications of these insights, reflecting on how Brandis' work impacts our understanding of the Day of the Dead and its cultural significance. Finally, we'll wrap up by summarizing the key points and analysis we've discussed, leaving you with a major takeaway that captures the core messages of the article. Let's get started with the overview of the article.
In his article, Stanley Brandis examines the cultural and historical layers behind the symbols and imagery we see in Mexico's Day of the Dead celebrations. Brandis shows how these symbols stem from a blend of indigenous beliefs about death and the European, specifically Catholic, traditions introduced during Spanish colonial rule. He highlights how Day of the Dead stands out for its joyful approach to death, unlike the more somber tone of many European death rites. Here, symbols like skulls and food offerings create a lively, communal way of engaging with mortality. Brandis also discusses the role of artists like Jose Guadalupe Posada, who added humor and satire to these symbols, helping shape Mexican identity.
Ultimately, Brandis argued that Day of the Dead art and iconography aren't just personal reflections, but also a way to keep cultural heritage alive, uniting themes of mortality with the celebration of life. To understand the richness of Day of the Dead traditions, Brandis identifies 5 key characteristics or symbols that highlight the unique blend of cultural, historical, and artistic elements. Let's walk through each one. The first key finding is the distinct characteristics that define Day of the Dead celebrations. Brandis emphasizes that these are unlike typical death rituals in many cultures. Rather than focusing solely on mourning, they involve food, music, colorful decorations, and a celebratory tone. This characteristic gives Day of the Dead its unique identity and reflects a cultural comfort with mortality.
The second finding traces the roots of Day of the Dead to pre-Hispanic indigenous practices. Brandis highlights how ancient Mexicans had their own rituals to honor the dead, viewing death as a natural continuation of life. This indigenous foundation helps explain why the holiday feels so vibrant and life-affirming even today. Brandis' third key finding focuses on how Day of the Dead represents Mexican identity. Through its symbols, the holiday blends both indigenous and Spanish influences, creating something distinctly Mexican. This sense of identity is reinforced by the humor and satire embedded in the Day of the Dead art, which Brandis attributes to a proud, resilient cultural spirit. Skeletons in schools are central symbols in Day of the Dead celebrations, and Brandis points out their unique role. Unlike in Western cultures where these images often invoke fear, here they're symbols of connection between the living and the dead. They are playful and joyful, embodying an acceptance of mortality rather than a fear of it.
The final key finding is the use of small caskets in Day of the Dead rituals, which serve as a tangible link to past generations. According to Brandis, these caskets symbolize cultural continuity, reminding participants that they're part of a long line of traditions. They also personalize the holiday, allowing families to create individual, intimate connections to the deceased. As we can see, these 5 findings give us a clear picture of how Day of the Dead blends history, art, and tradition. Each element not only celebrates life, but also reinforces the strong cultural identity that has endured over centuries.
Brandis highlights that to understand the art of the Day of the Dead, we must first identify its essential characteristics, what truly sets the celebration apart. He emphasizes examining the form, function, and meaning behind these elements, as not every skull or skeleton carries the same cultural weight. Form refers to vibrant colors, intricate designs, and symbolic items like marigold flowers, papel picado, and altars. Skulls and skeletons especially are depicted with friendly, lively expressions, adding a sense of warmth to what might otherwise seem grim. Function is crucial, as Day of the Dead serves to celebrate life and honor those who have passed. It creates a ritualized space for remembrance, allowing families to express pride in their heritage. This contrasts with traditions centered on mourning by instead reinforcing a cyclical view of life and death.
Finally, the meaning of these elements conveys an acceptance of death as part of a joyful human journey. It symbolizes resilience, offering cultural continuity and a source of identity, especially for Mexican and Mexican American communities. These characteristics are what make Day of the Dead art both unique and deeply meaningful.
Brandes also highlights the deep pre-Hispanic roots of Day of the Dead, drawing from ancient Mesoamerican death imagery. In their work, Elizabeth Carmichael and Chloe Sayer explore these roots in the Skeleton Feast, pointing to images like skull-faced gods, skeleton, and goddesses in the Tlampatli or skull rack. These symbols, they argue, have shaped today's Day of the Dead tradition. After the Spanish conquest, Catholicism influenced Mesoamerican practices. We see this through colonial-era art like the 18th century painting of a nun who has passed away, dances wearing devil masks, and decorated skulls. Over time, syncretism or blending of Aztec and Catholic elements began to emerge. A strong example is the image of Virgin of Guadalupe, who some link to the indigenous goddess Tonatzin. The ongoing use of skulls and skeletons in the Day of the Dead festivities today reflects this mix of pre-Hispanic and Catholic traditions, preserving the celebration's ancient origins while blending it with colonial influences. Brandes highlights how Day of the Dead exemplifies cultural continuity, incorporating religious belief, practices, and iconography from both pre-Hispanic and Spanish traditions. This blend shows a unique approach to death, not as something to fear but as a natural part of life. Humorous and playful iconography, like smiling skeletons, reflects this acceptance. The perception of death within Day of the Dead has evolved due to this combination of indigenous and Christian belief. Christian influence, such as the artistic depictions of death combined with European ideas, has shaped today's Day of the Dead imagery. Over generations, this cultural fusion has been passed down, with each generation adding to its own practices. This creates a dynamic living tradition that both deeply rooted in history and adapted, resulting in a unique cultural expression that continues to evolve.
Brandes emphasizes how Day of the Dead art represents Mexican identity in a unique way. The art forms are often ephemeral, like Pan de Muerto, sugar skulls, skeleton drawings, and papel picado, and are created specifically for the holiday. They aren't meant as permanent memorials, but instead celebrate life during All Saints and All Souls Day. The art is humorous and lighthearted. Skeletons and skulls are playful, evoking joy and connection rather than fear or mourning, which contrasts with typical Western death imagery. The iconography is secular and meant for the living, not the deceased. Much of this art is commercialized and made by skilled artisans, meaning it's accessible for purchase and transportable, so it's shared widely.
One of the most recognizable symbols of Day of the Dead is the skeleton, which appears in various forms. A popular example is pan de muertos, bread shaped like skeletons, which is widely enjoyed during this season. Skeletons are often displayed naked or clothed and holding objects that relate to gender, age, or occupation. This makes them highly personalized, reflecting the identities of those they represent. Another iconic image is the sugar skull or calavera, which often has a person's name written on it. This personalization turns the skull into a symbol of remembrance, representing individuals rather than abstract ideas of death.
During the end of October and beginning of November, newspapers feature images of well-known figures drawn as skeletons showing a playful view of mortality. Some of these images even depict skeletons in everyday scenes arranged in tiny dioramas or painted boxes that show them in lively everyday activities.
Another unique symbol in Day of the Dead celebrations is the small casket, often crafted from sugar or chocolate and decorated with bright, colorful icing, which adds a playful, interactive element to the holiday. Some caskets are personalized with names written in icing, making them a fun and symbolic treat for the living. One popular design features a small window on top, revealing a tiny sugar cadaver inside. An especially interesting detail is that these caskets sometimes come with a pull string that, when pulled, resurrects the cadaver inside. This playful nod to resurrection reflects the holiday's view of death as part of a continuous cycle, combining humor and tradition in a creative way. Next, to start with contextualization, Brandes explains how the Day of the Dead combines indigenous and European practices, blending ideologies from both cultures. This fusion has evolved over generations, creating a celebration that unites people across backgrounds, connecting them through a shared cultural expression. Brandes also notes how this integration has shifted perspectives on death itself. By merging indigenous views of death as a natural part of life with Catholic elements, Day of the Dead promotes a joyful, rather than fearful, embrace of mortality. Brandes' article also effectively examines the contrasting views of death between indigenous and European perspectives and analyzes religious syncretism, such as in Aztec art influenced by Catholic themes. However, he briefly mentions regional artwork from Jalisco without exploring their unique contributions and lacks specific on when humorous objects began appearing in All Saints and All Souls Day celebrations, leaving questions about their origins. We also wanted to visually highlight the Day of the Dead elements explored by Brandes, showcasing the syncretism between indigenous and European traditions. The humorous tone and blended influences reflect how Day of the Dead unites reverence and playfulness, bridging cultural views on death. Exploring the Day of the Dead's indigenous origins reveals how it uniquely celebrates life and death, using humorous imagery, like skeletons in schools, to bring light to the occasion. This understanding challenges the Mexican Halloween misconception, promoting a respectful view of the holiday. Today, commercialization through media like Coco brings global awareness to Day of the Dead, while its imagery often serves as a political statement, addressing social and political issues, much like memes and cartoons. This reading has deepened our appreciation for Day of the Dead symbols, highlighting that skulls, skeletons, and caskets carry rich cultural meaning. Learning this fosters respect for the tradition and its significance. In conclusion, the evolution of skull and skeleton imagery captures Day of the Dead's unique blend of humor, reverence, and social commentary, shaped by pre-Columbian and European influences. Our key takeaway is that the Day of the Dead bridges art, history, and evolving symbols, celebrating life and embracing mortality with openness and humor. This tradition reflects both past and present, adapting over generations as a living cultural expression that shapes Latin American views on life and death. Each symbol carries layers of history and meaning, honoring the cycle of life. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the Day of the Dead. We hope you now see how this tradition celebrates both life and death, keeping heritage alive through each generation.